Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Mormon Stories Podcast. I am one of your co-hosts today. I am John Dehlin, and I am joined by the thoughtful, the insightful, the funny, the witty Carah Burrell. Carah.
Hey, John.
Welcome.
Hey, everyone.
It's good to have you co-hosting today.
Yeah, I squeezed myself in here when I heard that Simon was doing another great analysis. So I'm really excited for this one and hope everyone else is too. Hey, everyone.
Absolutely. And we are also super excited to have with us the Gerardo Sumano as a second co-host. Wait, are you a second co-host or a third co-host? Which is that, Gerardo?
I think it would be second co-host.
Second co-host. All right.
Were you like your first presidency?
Right.
And Gerardo, this project was actually kind of your idea. You're producer on this one, right?
Yeah. Simon's been working really hard on this project that we all, discussed a few months ago. So we're really excited about it.
Yeah. And so without any further ado, let's add our special guest of honor. It's the Dr. Simon Southerton. Hey, Simon, welcome back to Mormon Stories Podcast.
Hey, Simon.
Hi, John. Hi, Carah. Hi, Gerardo. It's nice to catch up again.
And you're joining us from Australia, is that right?
That's right, from Canberra, and it's just after 10 o'clock in the morning.
I love it. Well, to kick off this episode, we have to begin by, let me introduce Simon really quick. Those of you who know Simon will know that he influenced me. So way back when I had my faith crisis back in the early 2000s, and I was trying to make sense of Mormonism without the internet, I stumbled on a book called Losing a Lost Tribe, written by Simon Southerton, this former Mormon bishop, geneticist from Australia, who had served as a Mormon bishop, who knew genetics, who studied Native American DNA, and started talking about it. And Simon, you were rewarded with what by talking openly about the genetics? How were you rewarded?
Eventually excommunication. It took about 7 years, and they use other excuses to excommunicate me, but yeah.
Yeah. And so Simon, you've influenced a lot of people. You've been at this game a long time, longer than me, which says something. And of course, you've been on Mormon Stories Podcast several times, so we'll include in the show notes past interviews with you, Simon, as well. But we want to begin today's episode by announcing a project that we are super excited about. And so, if you can go back to the first slide, Gerardo, please. The project that we're announcing is called Mormon Doctrine versus Science with Simon Southerton. And basically, you guys know that recently we've had John Larsen on. We're paying John Larsen to come on Mormon Stories once a month. And he's doing great content that so many of you value. We just announced the Thrive Story Project, where Margi Dehlin is going to be coming on to share stories about healing and growth from you. And we're looking forward to Margi doing that as well. We are excited to announce a third partner, a content partner for 2022, and that's Dr. Simon Southerton. The series is called Mormon Doctrine versus Science. And yeah, next slide. Thanks, Gerardo. Just to give you a sense for this project, Simon's going to come on monthly. He'll cover various topics regarding the interface between science and Mormon doctrine. We do, so much of Simon's work is worth mentioning that he really hasn't gotten paid for, whether it's his book with Signature Book that he doesn't even receive royalties from anymore, or this amazing new book that he's written called The Sacred Curse, or just all the blogging that he's done and all the research. We really are frustrated on Simon's part, but even more so motivated on Simon's part to help make sure that, just like many of us, he's getting some financial remuneration for his efforts. And so we plan on paying Simon for his work. And what we've done is we've set up a page on Mormon Stories. You can go to mormonstories.org/podcast/Simon, and you'll see that we've announced this episode, and there's a little donate button. And if you want to see Simon If you want to contribute so that Simon can get paid for his work, you click on that little donate button. You can select how much a month that you want to donate, become a monthly donor. And with that, we'll be able to, make Simon feel like we really value and appreciate his work. And the special deal that we have now going on is Simon's got this new book called The Sacred Curse, which is an important book with his updated science around genetics, DNA, and Native Americans. And what will happen is when you donate, clicking on this link, you will be sent a link to download that PDF. And that will be a gift that we offer you for supporting this series with Simon. And so that is kind of what we're talking about. And we really need your support to make this happen. 100% of your donations for this project will go to Simon. Mormon Stories covers overhead, me and Carah, Gerardo, all the people that support this stuff. So you can know that if you donate to Simon's project, 100% of that money is going to go to him. We're not going to skim anything off of that. And again, of course, you can get that amazing book from Simon. Simon, anything you want to say about this project before we kind of jump on to the next thing?
Not really. I think you've done a pretty generous introduction to it there. I think the sort of motivation for me is my own private experience of going through a faith crisis. Having been a very devout member of the church and having, very strongly held beliefs, stumbling on science that causes a problem and then going to leaders of the church and saying, how do I deal with this problem? They refer me to the scientists of Brigham Young University, and the Brigham Young University scientists don't believe the same things that the leaders of the church believe. So if I can help people to, I guess, to expose what's going on in sort of this process that's occurring in the church where the leaders don't have the answers, they direct them to scholars, and the scholars don't believe the same things as the leaders. I think that's something that I'm really keen to illustrate during the podcast series, because that was a critical thing for me, finding that the science that the scholars at Brigham Young University are dealing with, the way they handle it is very different to the way the senior leaders of the church interpret the science. But I really appreciate the opportunity to do this podcast series, because I think there's a lot of really fascinating science that's come up. Even, the 21st century, since the publication of the Human Genome, there's just an enormous wealth of scientific information out there, and there are many areas where LDS doctrine strays into the scientific realm, and science is perfectly entitled to push back and say, no, these are the facts in this area that you're talking about, and that's what we're going to be talking about today and in future episodes, which I'm really looking forward to.
Well, we are too. So super excited about that. Gerardo, did you want to add something?
So on YouTube also, we created a fundraiser that's going to be attached to all Simon's episodes, and if people donate through there, 100% of that also, since it's going through the Open Stories Foundation nonprofit, 100% of those donations will go to the Simon Fund.
Well, look at that. We've already raised $78.
Cool.
Yep.
In the Facebook, in the YouTube donor campaign. So we're on our way, Simon.
And I
thought I might just give a little bit of a teaser for some of the things that we might talk about.
Please.
Not all of them, and I'm actually very happy to have feedback from listeners. If there's any particular area of science that they'd really like to hear about or to be raised in an episode, I'm very happy to have criticism if I've got something wrong, and I do occasionally get things wrong. I think I got something wrong in the last episode, and we can correct things like that in a future episode. But today we're going to talk about the creation. And I think in that episode, we're basically going to open a whole can of worms. And in future episodes, we'll dissect and look at some of those worms. Like the next one we're going to be talking about will be human evolution. And that'll flow very nicely out of this episode. Then we'll talk about the flood and all the scientific evidence that does not support a global flood. I also want to talk about the most recent, very up-to-date, the latest genomics research on Native Americans, which is really fascinating and very compelling, but also just really interesting stories. I want to focus on just really interesting little tidbits of science that people may not be aware of. We'll talk about the genomes of the Polynesians. Genomic DNA is just really a very, very rich resource. It can tell you where a person's ancestry is, but it also can tell you the timing of previous migrations of your ancestors. So it's been very useful for looking deeply into the genomes of Native Americans and Polynesians. And in the case of Polynesians, it's revealed that Polynesians actually beat Columbus to the New World. It's very, very compelling evidence, but it's a fascinating story. But I also want to do an episode focusing entirely on the Maya. The Maya are a very fascinating, an amazing culture in the Americas. So talk about the DNA, but also just some of the really fascinating stuff that the Mayan civilization has brought to us. And a bunch of other things. And if I'm brave enough, I might do an episode on the science of same-sex attraction. That's something I've been very, very interested in for many years, and we're learning more and more about not just the genetics and the biology, but the psychology of this, of same-sex attraction. And I also hope to I will be inviting a number of scientists to join us. So fingers crossed we'll get some really fascinating scientists who work in the particular field to hop in and contribute.
That's great. We've already gotten some comments. Mark Blanchard basically says, I'm specifically interested in your thoughts on James Talmage, anti-Darwinist geology professor and Mormon apostle. So that whole era of like Talmage, Woodstow, Eyring, B.H. Roberts, just that history of that whole battle between them and Joseph Fielding Smith could be really interesting just to recount that history, because that story hasn't really been told in a more thoughtful way on Mormon Stories.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah.
And then somebody else, Jules writes, I would love to learn more about the Mayans. So yeah, people are excited, Simon.
Yeah, well, I think obviously the Mayans are where the limit of geography has really been focused. It's just focus on the science, just talk all about the science. We don't want to get too into bagging the apologists, and I mean, they're obviously dealing with something that they believe very strongly in, but science is science, and it's just they just really want to find truth, and this is what it's all about. It's getting to the truth of things. We're going to touch on Talmage today briefly, but I suspect for that listener is probably not going to be as deeply as they would like.
That's
sort of a little bit before my time. Probably a bit before your time too, John, I think.
Absolutely. Before your time?
A little bit before John's time.
Gerardo's the baby here. Gerardo's
Truly.
like 27. Is that right, Gerardo?
Aw.
No.
Well, I certainly had a copy of Jesus the Christ on my mission.
Right.
One of those little leather-bound pocket ones. It was a very prized possession.
All right. And again, for all those who are interested, you can go to mormonstories.org, or in the description here on Facebook or YouTube, click on the link, become a monthly supporter to Simon. And let's just make sure he gets paid for his work, because he deserves to.
Yeah, and I'm pasting it in the chat. So anyone in the chat, it's right there for you.
Thanks, Carah.
Yeah, thanks everyone for donating already. So I'm excited for this project.
All right. So Gerardo, do you want to tell us anything about why you wanted to kick off here, or anything else you want to say, Gerardo, before we jump in?
Sure. I mean, I guess Simon's going to do the introduction of the episode, but we me with Simon, we had been talking a lot about what should be the first episode that we do on this series, and we decided that probably the most appropriate thing is to start with the creation and with what the church teaches about the creation, evolution, getting just a little bit on Adam and Eve, but actually do a whole episode on Adam and Eve and why that doctrine is really important for Mormonism and for the historicity of the Book of Mormon and the scriptures that Joseph Smith produced. And also, coincidentally, this year, the church is studying on Sunday school. Everyone, young men, young women, adults, and even seminary, I believe, they're studying the Old Testament this year. So it's going to be kind of interesting to do some of the parallels of the things that the church is teaching right now, and with this series. So it's going to be really interesting.
All right. And we've got a really, really great comment that you're going to love, Simon. Somebody asks, Christian writes, how come British people always sound smarter? Must be the accent. Anything you want to say about that, Simon? You Brits sound so intelligent.
I'm going to be pretty careful what I say there.
Is that an insult to call an Aussie a Brit? Is that an insult?
No, well, I'm actually born here, but my parents are British. Yeah.
Okay.
Although my father was born in Shanghai, China, and my mum was born in Scotland, I think. Yeah.
Christian
Northern
apologizes.
Northern
He
England.
Christian says, my bad.
Yeah.
He says Australians have wicked accents too. So
yeah,
you still get the prize.
Mine's sort of a bit of a mixture, I think. Not a terribly broad Australian accent, but people here understand me. That's the main thing.
Well, let's jump in. And we've got, for those of you who are joining us just through audio, we're going to do our best to be as descriptive in our language as possible. But if you really want to get the full benefit of this podcast, we've got visuals, and you can go to YouTube or Facebook to check out the visuals.
Yeah.
But let's go ahead and start. Simon, you take it away, and Gerardo, you can drive the slides.
Yeah, and I think Gerardo may create put these links onto the website.
Yeah.
These ones that are embedded in the slides, if they go onto the website, that might be good. Yeah. So yeah, this I was actually quite a little bit taken aback when I saw this Institute lesson on the creation. I think it's because I've been out of the church for 20 years, and I've probably read more apologetic stuff than anything that's written by the church. And the apologists are always putting, the church doesn't have any opinion on evolution and, all that sort of stuff. And then I was just very surprised to see that this lesson has just heavily promotes young Earth creationism. Now, this is fundamentalist pseudoscience. It's well known that young Earth creationism has basically no basis in science at all. It's heavily reliant on the Bible. The Bible is just used as the evidence for this, and it's only through distorting science that you heavily distorting science that you can support young Earth creationism. So I had formed the opinion that the church had sort of moved away from this. But I was really quite taken aback to see it in this lesson, and Gerardo, I felt the same way. I think this lesson probably hasn't been touched for close to 45 years. I think it was probably written in the 80s.
Yes.
Yeah. So
there was a reprint or new edition. I believe it's 2006. So but nothing has changed on the.
Yeah. So what we're talking about here is the Institute lesson on the creation. So this is a lesson that's given to basically adults between the age of sort of 18 to 30. Would that be right? Would that be the young single adult age group that would
Yes,
Have the
correct.
Institute lessons?
Yep.
Okay. These are the next generation of leaders of the church, or some of them would be leaders of the church, and this is what they're being taught. And later
Young
in
Earth, for those who don't know the term Young Earth Creationists, it's just that the Earth is what, 6,000-7,000 years? Is that the idea?
it was created that life and man was created within the last 10,000 years.
Okay.
In the case of the LDS Church, it's sort of 7,000 years. Yeah. So this slide here summarizes pretty much the main sort of doctrinal points. It talks a little bit about the pre-earth life, but essentially the Mormon view, this summarizes the Mormon view of creation, which sort of comes out of the lesson. So after the pre-earth life, the world was created, but the LDS Church does not believe that it's everything came into existence 7,000 years ago. The belief is basically that the creation was an organizational process. So there was older stuff lying around, and that was used to create the earth. And I have heard that some members believe that dinosaurs are on other planets and they were moved to this planet to create this planet. But generally, there's no real issue with LDS doctrine in terms of the age of the earth. It's they recognize it as very old, the material used to make the earth. But what's very clear in LDS doctrine is that Adam and Eve are real people. So Adam was the first creature on the earth. There was no other mortal creature before him. Okay, so he was the first physical mortal being, and then through his fall, he brought death to the world, and then other life came to being. Other mortal beings came into existence.
That's a term I remember reading in Doctrines of Salvation, I believe. No death before the fall, and that's animals and human life,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
That's Mormon prophets, seers, and revelators teaching that there was no death before the fall of Adam and Eve.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was taught that when I was 18, and I remember my first Relief Society talking about the importance of no death before the fall and Adam and Eve. So that was definitely part of my upbringing.
Yeah. So a term that we'll see later on that's used is the term pre-Adamites, when we're talking about humans that may have existed before Adam. But to add even further weight to that belief that we're all descended from Adam 6,000 or 7,000 years ago, and he was our father, is that the Garden of Eden was a real place. So it's very clear in LDS scripture. And we're going to read some of these scriptures just in a moment. We might take turns in reading these. But the Garden of Eden is located in a place called Adamondiaman, which is in Davies County, Missouri. So LDS doctrine very neatly brings the United States into the picture. And another point that's raised in the lesson is that the Earth is 7,000 years old. Okay, so that before the flood, so when the Earth was created, there was just one land mass, and then the flood and the cataclysms after the flood changed the Earth and the geography of the Earth. So we're not going to talk much more about the global flood, but that's something we'll talk about in the future. And we'll talk a lot about Adam and Eve, and a little bit more about Adam and Eve now, but we will have an episode where we delve a little bit deeper into Adam and Eve.
And really quickly, I guess you're going to show some scriptures. Let's go ahead and go to the scriptures, and then I'll come back to the point.
Yeah. So here's a scripture from the Doctrine and Covenants, which tells us how old the earth is. So this is it's Doctrine and Covenants 77 is written as sort of question and answer session with Joseph Smith and God answering. And the question is, what are we to understand by the book which John saw, which was sealed on the back with 7 seals? This is this is from Revelations. That's the John that it's referring to. And the answer is from God. We are to understand that it contains the revealed will, mysteries, and the works of God, the hidden things of his economy concerning this earth during the 7,000 years of its continuance or its temporal existence. So that's where you get this. We know the age of the earth in terms of the physical beings that on the earth it's 7,000 years since that time. And Gerardo, you added this slide, so I might let you talk to that one.
Yeah. So this was just an interesting find that because I was trying to compare, because I know the Institute manual hasn't been really redone since the 80s, but the church has made new seminary manuals. So I was curious what it said, and the last Doctrine and Covenants seminary manual for students that was published in 2017 has this quote about Doctrine and Covenants 77. It says, it may be helpful to understand that in Doctrine and Covenants 77, verse 6, the 7,000 years is in reference to the earth's temporal existence, meaning since the fall of Adam. It is not commenting on the age of the earth. So basically, they're admitting to what Simon was saying, that the materials that were used to build the earth were old, but Adam lived 7,000 years ago, and they're reiterating that idea.
Yeah.
And go to the previous scripture, Gerardo. But it says it's temporal existence. That's how that verse ends, right?
Yeah. The church Mike Conkey and Joseph Filling Smith interpretation is that when Adam fell, the whole earth started its temporal existence, because before Adam's fall, the earth was eternal.
Okay. All right. Okay.
Yeah.
I think McConkie even went as far as to say that the fruit, when they partook of the fruit, blood started, because it was before their bodies didn't have blood. So then the fruit made blood start kind of like flowing in their bodies, and that's what made them mortal. And it happened to all creatures on earth as well. Why are you laughing, John?
It sounds like a sci-fi movie. Like everybody's immortal, and then they eat this fruit, and then all of a sudden their blood transforms, and the earth like changes its spiritual nature, and all of a sudden becomes mortal or temporal. But it's in the scriptures. I mean, that's the point you're making, is that this is God chose to reveal this to Joseph Smith.
Right.
Yeah. God had a lot of important things to get out. Joseph Smith only had a few revelations, and the temporal nature of the earth was one of the most important ones for us to understand, apparently. So this is some good stuff.
Yeah.
All right.
But we will try and stick to the scriptures as much as we can here. So the doctrine, but I couldn't resist putting in a quote from Brigham Young later on that we'll talk about, where they get a little bit, it's very sci-fi-ish. You got the world spinning around the universe and ending up in this galaxy and this solar system. Yeah. So the other thing that's quite clear in LDS scripture is the centrality of Adam and Eve. So we won't talk a great deal about this, but Adam and Eve. Adam was a major. I guess he was a very valiant spirit in the pre-existence. I think that there's a belief that he was involved in the creation of the earth, and that there were many of these spirits that were involved in guiding the direction and the creation of the earth. It's quite clear from LDS scripture that we are all descended from Adam and Eve. He's our father. So I might read the verse. We've got two verses of scripture here. One is from the Book of Mormon, 2 Nephi 2. And one of these is a well-known scripture to anybody that's studied in seminary. And now behold, if Adam had not transgressed, he would not have fallen, but he would have remained in the Garden of Eden. And all things which were created must have remained in the same state in which they were after they were created, and they must have remained forever and had no end. So all these animals and living things on the planet are there forever. But here is the scripture verse that every young Mormon memorizes when they're in seminary.
Yeah,
This is
scripture
from
mastery.
verse 24. Adam fell that men might be, and men are that they might have joy. And then another verse here in Moses, chapter 6, verse 48. And he said unto them, because that Adam fell, we are, and by his fall came death. And we are made partakers of misery and woe. So that's what we're in here, folks. We're in misery and woe.
Yeah, and so it's spanning doctrine, like these very literal scientific claims are God made the effort to reveal them not just in the Book of Mormon, but in the Book of Moses and in the Doctrine and Covenants.
Yeah, and Abraham. Yeah, so it's all through all of the additional scriptures that probably have their origin in the 19th century.
But wait, there's more.
There's more. Who would like to read these out? These are some scriptures that clearly identify where the Garden of Eden is.
Carah
I'll
will
do
read
it.
them. Yeah.
So we got DNC section 116. Spring Hill is named by the Lord Adamon because he said he, it is the place where Adam shall come to visit his people, or the Ancient of Days shall sit, as spoken of by Daniel the prophet. And section 107, verse 53 states, 3 years previous to the death of Adam, he called Seth, Enos, Canaan, Malchachel, not that Mormon, I don't know how to pronounce all these names, Jared, Enoch, and Methuselah into the valley of Adamon, and there bestowed upon them his last blessing.
What are these saying, Simon?
Well, it's saying that Adam was physically there at Adamon, giving a blessing to all of these patriarchs. And that's from 107. And from 116, it identifies where Adamon are. So joining the dots between those two things, then the Garden of Eden and Adam walked. So Adam walked in the Garden of Eden, and it's located in Missouri at Adamon. So that is a physical location in America.
And that's a belief that's still upheld today, right? There's never been any kind of like recanting. That's where the LDS Church still believes the Garden of Eden is located.
Yes.
That hasn't changed since Joseph Smith said it. Okay.
No.
Or put it in, God said it. I'm sorry.
Yeah, and I think it really locks them in. It locks them into Adam being a real person because he's got land that he walked on.
And he's going
to go back. Gerardo, go back 1 second.
Yeah.
I really, so one of our listeners makes a fun comment. Jules 2.0 writes, I love that one of the names is Jared. It's like Methuselah, Enoch, Mahalalel, Canaan, Enos, Seth, and Jared.
And Justin.
And Beverly. No, it's a fun point. No, but doesn't the Bible have a lineage that goes from Adam and Eve to his children down to Noah, and then from Noah all the way down to Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, and then David? Like the Old Testament itself gives a pretty clear literal interpretation of its history that all humans come from Adam and Eve around 6,000 years ago. Is that true, Simon?
Yeah.
It's not just Mormonism. This is Old Testament stuff, right?
Well, we'll talk about this a bit later on, but there are many Christian religions that don't subscribe to this, to Adam and Eve being real people. Okay, it's basically a creation myth.
Yeah.
Quite a few Christian churches don't have any problem with it.
Right.
And that's okay, except for the fact that by looking at these Mormon scriptures, you can see, and Joseph's own prophecies and declaring, the New Jerusalem and Missouri being the site of the Garden of Eden and Adam and
Yeah.
I mean, the
It just
Mormon
adds-
scripture and doctrine is locked into this theory
It
tightly.
is sort of part of the bedrock. It
Gerardo-
just makes it much more. I mean, the church does proudly talk about these being a second witness. The Book of Mormon is a second witness. And, the Doctrine and Covenants, Pearl of Great Price are additional witnesses, and it all is fairly consistent. And so it does make it challenging for the church to work around this.
Gerardo,
Yeah.
what were you going to add? We're going to add something, Gerardo?
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say. We are probably one of the only churches out there who claims that have a prophet that speaks to God directly. Even other religions like Jehovah's Witnesses do not make those kind of claims. So the fact that we produce new scripture, which is revealed directly by God, like that locks Mormonism into this thinking, and like Simon said, there's very little wiggle room for LDS doctrine.
Yeah, I mean, obviously there are very many, particularly the evangelicals, that hold this very similar views to the LDS Church based on the Bible, and the Bible is inerrant, so there's no mistakes in there, and they just follow it. But there are many religions that don't get hung up on it.
Yeah.
It's
And
just
we're all
harder, I think.
Yeah.
I know, and it's probably worth mentioning. We're all taught to refer to the Book of Mormon as what? Which book? What?
Keystone of our religion.
But also
Yeah.
The most correct book.
the most correct book, right?
Yeah.
And of all books, I assume, right? The most correct book of all books.
I believe that's in the same Joseph Smith quote, right? Not only is it the keystone of our religion, it is the most correct book that people will get closer to God by adhering to it than by any other book. And may I just add, it is really hard to read a lot of books instead of just one. It's really hard to listen to a lot of experts instead of just one. And so Mormonism kind of funnels people into read one book and you'll get the correct answers. It's harder to read a lot of books and, decipher fact from fiction from them. So anyway, continue.
So to spice it up, I thought I'd throw in a Brigham Young
Love
speculation. So this is from the Discourses of the Journal of Discourses. I don't know which year he said this, but I'll read the quote. When the earth was framed and brought into existence and man was placed upon it, it was near the throne of our Father in heaven. And when men fell, the earth fell into space and took up its abode in this planetary system, and the sun became our light. Okay.
That's Brigham Young, physicist, geophysicist.
Yeah.
That I was taught this by my dad as factual.
Yeah.
Like that's what happened when Adam fell. Like my whole life I believed this. And that's when the dinosaurs died, when the earth fell into our current solar system.
Yeah.
So like the earth is like hanging around Kolob.
Yeah.
And then
I
when
think that's what he was thinking there.
Yeah. Joseph Fielding Smith talked about it. McConkie talked about it too. It was not just Brigham Young. And, just like, I think it was Bednar who said that multiple general authorities talking about the subject, you should pay attention,
Simon, is that the way planets work? Do they fall into space? Is that the way it works? Are they like hanging out and then they fall into place? Is that how space works?
Things seem to take an awful long time in space, and I think the Earth's been pretty much in this orbit for an awful long time. To be fair to the church, this is they'll just sort of blow this off because it's just he's speaking as a man and he's speculating, and that's fair enough. And there are lots of other things that have been said by church leaders at times that are pretty crazy, but I won't dwell on those. But that's quite different. Him speculating is quite different to the doctrine that we were talking about earlier. That's really, there's very little wiggle room with that sort of, when you've got scriptures that are fairly explicit like that. So
this looks
the
familiar.
lesson we're talking about today is the Institute Manual. Okay, so and we're going to talk a little bit now about the Young Earth Creationism that's within the Institute manual, but it's not, a lot of that material is not in the seminary manuals. So there are other manuals where that's been either pulled out or they're not teaching that to the youth. And it's probably a good thing, because the less Young Earth Creationism you teach to young kids, the better, because it doesn't prepare them very well for an educated life if they go to university or anything like that. So
I was the one that added this slide because I remembered.
Tell our listeners what the slide is, Gerardo.
So this is a timeline that the church still has on their website. It's still part of the seminary curriculum on their website, and it's what you were saying, John. Like the Bible provides kind of like a timeline of how many years each prophet lived and when they died and when the next one, like was born. So this is not just the church's timeline. Like I know several other like Orthodox Christians would believe this as to be the Old Testament timeline. So the church used to print these. I don't know if they still do, and they hand them out to seminary or institute students. And it basically has just a timeline of all the prophets of the Old Testament: Adam, Seth, Jared, Noah, Enoch, Methuselah. It even has Lehi in there at 600 BC, leaving Jerusalem, to go to the Americas. It says Lehi goes to the Americas in 600 BC. And it has Adam as being born or created around 3900 BC. So that puts him around 7,000 years ago.
No, it starts at 4,000. It starts at 4,000. It just 4,000's off the chart. Yeah.
Right.
So it's got Adam being born 4,000 BC, living 930 years.
Yeah, that's what Bible says.
Yeah. That's what you can't blame the Mormons for that.
And Jared lived 962, and then Methuselah is 969. So Methuselah almost lived 1,000 years. That's pretty impressive, Simon.
Yeah. I think those names that Carah read out that she struggled with, I think they were taken directly from the Bible.
I took the syllables I said directly from the Bible too. That's exactly expressly how they're supposed to be said.
Yeah.
But that, I mean, again, even if the church is moving away from this graphic, this is what we were taught for 100, 150 years, right? Like, and we were taught it by prophets, seers, and revelators that claim to have direct lines to God. I think that's, even if the church is kind of distancing themselves, there still should probably be some type of accountability for what so many of us were taught forever. There's even a comment in the comment section that this graphic is triggering for some people because it's so interwoven with their high school years and seminary and scripture chase and all that stuff.
Yeah.
But it's still on the website. It hasn't been. It's part of the curriculum still.
Yeah. All right, Simon, what else?
Also, that chart is very LGBTQ friendly, if I just might add.
It is. It's super LGBTQ friendly.
It's very sassy.
Yeah.
The yassified map. Sorry, just wanted to say, church, good job on your graphic.
Yeah. So this next slide, I've put this in just to illustrate that, this hasn't been, we're challenging, we're questioning the things that are the claims of the church here, but there's been a lot of argument and debate, mostly between educated sort of scientists, general authorities that have had some scientific training, and other more black and white general authorities in the past. But there was a very notable event in the 1930s when Brigham B.H. Roberts, who was in the quorum of the 70 at the time, he was assigned by the first presidency to create a student manual for the Melchizedek priesthood holders. And in that draft, he stated that death had been occurring on Earth for millions of years prior to the fall of Adam, and that human-like pre-Adamites had lived on the Earth. Now that manual, the draft manual, then went to the apostles, and Joseph Fielding Smith, who was an apostle at the time, later became the president of the church, I think in the very early 70s. He was vehemently opposed to that wording in the draft. And there's a wonderful quote there from Joseph F. Smith that's quoted. I could dig up where it's from, but no Adam, no fall, no atonement, no atonement, no savior. So he's a very, very black and white apostle, and he was not mincing words. He just was not going to have any admission that there was death before the fall or the existence of pre-Adamites.
And he outranked B.H. Roberts.
He outranked Roberts.
He was an apostle and eventually prophet.
Yes.
Okay, the problem, I mean, Joseph Fielding Smith is right. If you're believing LDS doctrine, having death before Adam really represents a problem, because then, especially for Mormons who believe that, before, like, Adam and Eve could not have kids in the Garden of Eden, and that's why they had to fall, because they had to experience death, and that was all part of the plan. So having death before Adam presents a real problem to why was there a need for, like, Adam and Eve being tempted on the first place. And then, just like Joseph Fielding Smith is saying here, if Adam didn't fall, then why do we need an atonement, and what do we need a savior for? So, like, having death before Adam really, really presents a big problem for Mormons.
Huge kink in the structure for sure. No Adam, no fall, no atonement, no savior. And the leaders that we're supposed to be getting this information from, you could say, if there was all of these things, if there was death before the fall, you could posit maybe no prophet.
Yeah. But so it was actually quite it was a very, very difficult time for the church, because they had this. So Joseph Fielding Smith was really opposed. He actually went into published something in a church magazine at the time, which was where he expressed his opposition to that sort of view. James E. Talmage came into the picture. He was an apostle at the time. He was concerned because the church wanted to sort of publicly take a neutral position, but Joseph Fielding Smith had publicized his views so much. James E. Talmage became concerned that the alternative view wasn't being given enough airing, and he was actually given permission by the first presidency to, I think he gave a talk in Salt Lake or something, maybe at BYU or whatever. And during that talk, he expressed some support for B.H. Roberts' views in terms of the possibility of pre-Adamites, but he didn't really believe evolution. So he wasn't an evolutionist, but he got hardly any exposure for the things that he wrote. And I think this is a trend that's been repeated over and over and over again. The church pretends to have no position, or says it's neutral on all these controversial things, but the people that are given the most oxygen are people that are the fundamentalists. And a good example there is Bruce R. McConkie. And this is what he was an apostle at the time in 1980s. I suspect this was just around about the time this lesson was written. He said there were no pre-Adamites. Adam was not the end product of evolution. Sorry, you've just taken. There we go. Yeah, Adam was not the end product of evolution. There was no death in the world, either for man or for any form of life, until after the fall of Adam. So that was in Bruce R. McConkie. Some of those quotes are from Bruce R. McConkie's book, Mormon Doctrine, which, of course, the church now doesn't. Do they still publish that? I don't know if they still publish it.
No.
But they don't endorse it.
They're
Yeah.
definitely
But-
distancing themselves from it. Yeah.
But it's still being quoted in current curriculum,
Right.
for Sunday school, and even the newest ones. While they now try to quote modern prophets a lot more, living ones, they're still quoting Bruce R. McConkie and Joseph Fielding Smith. And if we go back just a few years earlier, like it's just like Simon saying, the manuals and what the church was teaching in Sunday school, institute, seminary was not about pre-Adamites and what James Talmage taught about these things, or B.H. Roberts. Everything was based on Joseph Fielding Smith and McConkie's ideas. So it's really a problem when the church tries to say that they're neutral on these issues, when like Simon's making the point, the exposure that the church decides to give it is to these fundamentalist ideas, and that's why we all grew up with that.
Yeah, and the lesson, this that we're talking about, this institute lesson, is heavily leaning on the fundamentalist side. And perhaps Gerardo, you could read out the next quote, and this is a quote taken from that's given in the lesson, I think.
Yes, this is from the Institute manual. It's Joseph Fielding Smith. It says, "I say most emphatically, you cannot believe in this theory of the origin of man, and at the same time accept the plan of salvation as set forth by the Lord our God. You must choose the one and reject the other, for they are in direct conflict, and there is a gulf separating them, which is so great that it cannot be bridged, no matter how much one may try to do so."
Yeah. And he made many, many other comments like that are continuously quoted, because he became the prophet. He was the prophet for 2 years. In fact, we joined the church in 1970, and he died not long after we joined.
And I tend to have wanted to demonize folks like Joseph Fielding Smith because of their fundamentalism. But on the other hand, you kind of have to respect their consistency, because what he's doing is he's taking Mormon scripture seriously, and he's taking Joseph Smith seriously. He's taking the temple ceremony seriously. And he's just saying, if I have to choose between scripture and Joseph Smith's divine calling and, revealed science, I'm going with scripture and Joseph Smith's divine calling every single time. And so even though he tends to be demonized today as really misguiding generations of people into faulty thinking and bad science, I mean, he's consistent and has integrity in the sense of upholding Mormon doctrine and theology in scripture.
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think that's a fair assessment.
It's intellectually consistent. It may not be intellectually sophisticated, but at least it's consistent.
Yeah, it was so consistent that it did 80% of my faith crisis. So thanks for that quote, JFS.
Yeah. But it's consistent, but unfortunately he's straying very heavily into the scientific realm, as does the scripture.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, people are looking up to these people as prophets, and there's quotes in Mormonism that say that a prophet can speak to anything at any time, right? And so a lot of people, they don't even need to look into the science of the evolution if that's what their prophet and their leaders are saying is true about the age of the earth and things. What more books do you need to read? That's definitely the way that I was raised. So
So what we've talked about up until now is pretty much the lesson. Now, I think many teachers probably wouldn't even talk to these points to ponder parts, but at the end of the lesson, this is where we get into the Young Earth Creationism. So,
do you want me to read it?
Sorry, go ahead.
Do you want me to read it?
Yeah, gosh, go ahead.
But what of the scientific evidence that supposedly contradicts these statements? Isn't the evidence that all life evolved from a common source overwhelming? Harold G. Coffin, professor of paleontology and research at the Geoscience Research Institute, Andrews University in Michigan, presented one scientist's view of how life began. The following excerpts are from a pamphlet on the creation written by Dr. Coffin.
Yeah. Now, Dr. Coffin, there's some interesting background here. He's a Seventh-day Adventist, and Andrews University is a Seventh-day Adventist university. And he was a professor of paleontology there. So the lesson then goes on to put very large quotes straight out of a 16-page pamphlet, which is an individual scientist's opinions, and none of it's peer-reviewed. It's a 16-page pamphlet. Okay, virtually zero credibility. And these are the views that Coffin expresses, and I'll just make a few comments of them in a moment. But basically, the first one is that life is unique. Basically, it's complicated, and it could never. It's to summarize. This is basically anti-evolution. This Young Earth Creationism is just anti-evolutionism. So life is unique. Complex animals appear suddenly, and he gives some evidence for this. Basic kinds of animals have not changed, so there's no shifting from one to the other. So those two arguments there are basically arguments from ignorance. So, because we don't have any particular evidence right now, there's a gap. And so this is where God hides in these gaps between pieces of evidence. So the missing links that you hear about sort of comes from these sorts of ideas in Young Earth Creationism. And it was interesting reading the words of a scientist who had debated many Young Earth Creationists. And he said, as soon as you provide evidence to fill a gap, they just come back and say you've just created two new gaps on either side of the piece of evidence you've just given. And the final claim is the claim that change in the present is limited. But there's a wonderful quote here that I like from a man named Herbert Spencer. He says, those who cavalierly reject the theory of evolution as not adequately supported by facts seem quite to forget that their own theory is supported by no facts at all. So I just wanted to give you a taste for some of the things that Harold Coffin mentions that are quoted in this Institute manual. I'll just comment briefly on some of those. If you move to the next slide, Gerardo. The claim
Gerardo, you're muted. Gerardo, you're muted. You want to unmute yourself if you're talking.
Yeah, sorry. I just want to say something really quick.
Yep.
I can, as I was reading these 4 points that the lesson manual quotes from Coffin, I can remember at least 2 or 3 references from Russell M. Nelson promoting these ideas. I think a couple of them in General Conference. Russell M. Nelson is famous for that quote where he pretty much says that that an explosion of a printing press would not produce a dictionary, and life is so complex, so evolution cannot produce. Pretty much what he's saying is evolution cannot produce the human species. He also has promoted the idea of dogs have always been dogs, which is the quote that we're going to present later. But Russell M. Nelson, current prophet of the church, believes all or most, if not all, of these ideas.
Yes. Yeah. So
and he's a medical doctor, which some find fascinating.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A cardiologist.
Maybe he went to med school when all of these ideas were really not that out of whack with the other med students he was with.
Didn't Charles Darwin live in the 1800s, though?
Well, maybe he went to BYU and give the guy a break. He just hasn't updated his textbooks. He's still flipping through the ones from the 50s.
Give Brother Russell a break. I got it. Okay.
Well, the most compelling evidence for evolution that we have now is DNA, without question, because it's completely independent from the fossil evidence. And DNA, the molecule, wasn't discovered until years after President Nelson would have got his degree. The human genome wasn't sequenced until, turn of the century. So he'd be completely unaware of that sort of science.
Yeah, there's people who got their scientific
Yeah.
education before the genome was sequenced, and then there's the after.
Well, I think, he would have been an outstanding cardiologist, and I think I've made the observation later on that if I had a heart attack and I wanted a cardiologist to operate on me, I wouldn't care what he believed about evolution. He could be completely ignorant about it. All I would want him to be knowledgeable about would be hearts and how to fix my heart. So,
Right.
The
Just
fact that
slow
he's a
down the surgery by
cardiologist,
saying a prayer.
just has no bearing on his knowledge of evolution. So, but this claim, I'll read out a quote from the lesson from Coffin. If you could expand that a little.
Yeah.
Sorry,
I love when Carah reads the quotes.
Okay, go ahead, Carah.
With my clear
Life is
diction and
unique.
proper pronunciation of all of the words.
Yeah.
Yes.
Have I got any nasty words in there? No, I think you're okay.
Okay, we're good. So it says some responses to Coffin's claims. Life is unique. Quote, scientist Homer Jacobson reports in American Scientist, January 1955, from the probability standpoint, the ordering of the present environment into a single amino acid molecule would be utterly improbable in all the time and space available for the origin of terrestrial life.
Yeah.
All right, so Simon, tell us what that's saying.
Well, I've highlighted a section there for those who can see the slide. He says the ordering of the present environment. Okay, he just couldn't imagine that it would create an amino acid molecule. The current environment is the current environment. Scientists are getting a much greater understanding of what the world's atmosphere was like, 3 to 4 billion years ago when the earlier signs of life started appearing. So, and they've been doing experiments where they're starting to, mixing the ingredients and they are finding that some of these molecules will spontaneously create themselves and start assembling. So there was never a time that all of these things were happening in a very, very different world 3 or 4 billion years ago. For example, the oxygen that we have in the air only came into existence about 2.2 billion years ago. And that was cyanobacteria were starting to create the oxygen. So it was living things that were starting to create the oxygen, which then created the environment for life to really kick off and evolution to start occurring. So there's a clear error in his thinking there, and it's perfectly understandable for something that was written back in 1975. The next statement that he makes, complex animals appear suddenly. And what he's referring to is the Cambrian explosion. Now, and he quotes a man named Charles Walcott, who was an early president of this, whatever you call the person in charge of the Smithsonian, probably the director of the Smithsonian. In 1910, Charles Walcott, while riding horseback across the Canadian Rockies, stumbled onto a most interesting find of sea fossils. This site has provided the most complete collection of Cambrian fossils known. They are found in the oldest rocks that contain any significant number of fossils. Where are their ancestors? That's the question. There's no explanation. Well, the Cambrian explosion took place at a time when animals started to create hard shells around them and make much better fossils. That's the main thing that was going on then. But there was there was an explosive period. If we go to the next slide, you can actually see this slide puts it into sort of context. You can see the red bar in the middle there, 500, it's about 520 to 570 million years ago is when the Cambrian explosion took place. And that's when the body, the basic body assemblage of most living animals on the earth, that's when it was sort of established. So jellyfish, worms, mollusks, arthropods and crustaceans all start appearing in that very explosive period. But scientists have found many fossils before that period. So there are fungi and sponges that are 600, 700 million years before then, corals 700 to 800 million years ago, and then bacterial fossils around about 1 billion years ago. So, and he's focusing on the Cambrian explosion, sort of takes is distorting the picture of evolution which has occurred since the Cambrian. So you've got a whole range of organisms, fish, flying insects, appearing 400 to 500 million years ago. Dinosaurs around about 300 million years ago. Mammals not so long after. Birds, flowers and bees only 100 million years ago. And then primates about 10 million years ago. So, yeah, the Cambrian explosion, there was a rapid evolution over about a 70 million year period. But the Young Earth Creationists have exploited this rapid explosion to claim that that's when everything happened all rapidly and jammed it all together.
I wouldn't exactly call 50 or 60 million years rapid, though.
No. It's just like you can sort of understand why it's occurring. It's probably the environment had changed to a point. There's tons of oxygen in the atmosphere. And when something works, and this is how evolution works. Evolution works, it's not a random process. There are random changes that occur, but evolution, whatever works, gets reproduced and carried on to next generations. So there are just a whole pile of things that's changes that occurred that were selected on and then passed on, and you get these very rapid explosions that occur. And there are explosions in evolution that are happening all the time throughout that period. For example, I'll give you a good example from eucalypts. I've got a couple of tree groups there that I've highlighted as well. Conifers emerged about 300 million years ago, whereas eucalypts and other flowering plants, so conifers are cone-bearing. There's a big difference between cone-bearing plants and the eucalypts, which are flowering, and all of the other flowering plants that we have on the earth. They emerged about 100 million years ago. But eucalypts in Australia have now evolved into about 800 different species. If you come to Australia and you drive anywhere and you go anywhere in Australia, all you see are eucalypts. One genus. And it's evolved extremely rapidly over about a period where most of them have evolved within the last 2 to 3 million years. About 800, definitely in the last 5 million years. 800 different species of eucalypts, because Australia has become a very dry continent and eucalypts are extremely well adapted. They've found a way to survive in a very dry continent with lots of bushfires. So if you go out into a eucalypt forest after a bushfire, they bounce back, they sprout back after a bushfire. I should have stuck in a photo of them. But so there are many explosions that occur during evolution. There are periods when not a lot of change occurs because there's the organism hasn't picked up an advantage that can make them dominate other organisms in the environment. So while the eucalypts were exploding, there might have been many other species that went extinct because the eucalypts outcompeted them. So I just wanted to put the Cambrian explosion into context there. So he makes a lot of other points. He makes some comments about derogatory. This is Coffin we're talking about now. He makes some fairly derogatory comments about Neanderthals and casts doubt over whether they were any different to human beings. And of course, we now have the genome of Neanderthals, and we now know that most of us have about 3 to 4% of Neanderthal DNA in our own genome, which we'll talk a lot more in the next episode when we talk about human evolution. So those are my responses to Coffin. But what is most really quite interesting is that the Young Earth Creationism that I've been talking about, that's in this Institute manual, is completely rejected by scientists at Brigham Young University. So the lesson manual makes no citations of Mormon scientists. It cites a Seventh-day Adventist scientist from 45 to 50 years ago, but makes no reference to BYU. And it's not surprising that we've got young Earth creationism ideas are now starting to crop up in the LDS community, precisely because the church doesn't take a position. And as we can see, the doctrine that we've been talking about is very powerful. And we've now got the firm foundation with Rodney Meldrum spreading young Earth creationist ideas. And back in 2017, the Firm Foundation advertised one of their conferences in the BYU Daily Universe magazine. And featuring at this Firm Foundation conference was Dean Sessions, who has published these enormous books where he proves that the entire scientific community of the world is in the Dark Ages, and that he has discovered a new scientific paradigm. And that is that the Earth, the center of the Earth is filled with water, and that water came out and flooded the Earth during the flood. It's just absolutely crazy stuff. And
I have had a front row seat to that speech of Dean Sessions at the Book of Mormon Evidence Conference.
I did see that. That was great. I'd love to be there. I mean, it's very entertaining stuff. But can you imagine how scientists who work their butts off for their career and are respected academics at Brigham Young University, and here the BYU magazine is publicizing an event that's spouting young Earth creation? These people are cranky. And so they write in, and let's read this out. Who's John? You haven't had a chance.
I'll read it.
Okay.
So this is
this is signed by a bunch of the academics and PhDs and a whole
They're
bunch
just not
of,
having any of it.
students.
They're like,
Yeah.
okay.
So this is
So this
Daily
is published in the
Universe,
Daily Universe. Yeah.
April 4th, 2017. In defense of peer-reviewed science. This is at a Division I university in the 21st century. In defense of peer-reviewed science. Let us just clarify. Okay, quote, "We, members of the BYU's Department of Geological Sciences, cannot accept Mr. Sessions' universal model as it runs contrary to multiple lines of empirical evidence and generations of scientific query. It would not pass expert peer review." I would say, to put it mildly, that's my commentary.
Yes.
Next paragraph. "Students and the BYU community are reminded that organic evolution, anthropogenic climate change, radiometric dating, and a 4.56 billion year old age of the Earth are all seriously taught on campus by professors who are in good standing with the church in fields directly relating to these subjects. Students may learn more about these subjects through a variety of courses offered by the Department of Geological Sciences, as well as from other departments." They kind of threw down the gauntlet.
Yes. Yeah. And a whole bunch of them signed it. And there would be, there would be many other scientists in the life sciences department that would have been equally angry with with that advertisement. Because yes, it's not, Dean Sessions doesn't have a strong scientific background, and nothing that he's writing has been peer reviewed, and yeah, rightly so. They're very, very annoyed. Yeah.
Mikey Mike writes, "Wow, I'm surprised that they affirm evolution."
They want to stay accredited, so they kind of have to.
Well, let's flick to the next slide, because they
Can I just say,
teach
Simon, really
evolution.
quickly? Simon, really quickly.
Yeah.
There's a few super chats that have come in. H.
Yay.
Benzula donated $50 to Simon's project, and Garrick
thank you, guys.
J donated 20. We really appreciate those of you who are either through the stars feature on Facebook or through the super chat feature on YouTube. And Simon, the fundraising campaign for your initiative is up to $158 here on YouTube. So people are stepping
thank you
up.
very much,
I just wanted to take a minute to thank those who are donating. And of course, again, there's a link in the description where any of you who want to become monthly supporters to Simon's new Mormon Doctrine versus Science series, you can support this episode and you'll get a free copy of Simon's new book on Book of Mormon genetics. Okay, sorry. Keep going, Simon. I just had to make that shout out and thank our donors.
Yeah. So it gets even, they're not only teaching organic evolution, they're teaching human evolution at Brigham Young University. And they're equally frustrated by the statements of earlier general authorities in the church, like the one of Joseph Fielding Smith that we read out. And you can see this comment from Dr. Michael Whiting, who's teaching human evolution at BYU. This is a quote from him on Twitter. "Nothing has been more destructive to our students than giving them an ultimatum that they must either believe the gospel or believe in evolution." You can see you can just tell who he's responding to. He's responding to the problems that Joseph Fielding Smith is creating for them.
And he calls it destructive. Nothing has been more destructive. So not even John Dehlin has been more destructive than what Joseph Fielding
It's true.
Smith did.
Can I just speak from experience? Accepting that my church did not accept evolution did 80% of my faith crisis. I didn't even care about anything to do with this guy. I'm sorry, Gerardo. I'm sorry, LGBT rights were not on my purview. Nothing else. I just couldn't accept that. I know for a fact evolution and we, evolved and had this common ancestor. Yeah. I couldn't worship. I just couldn't do it anymore.
But for our non-Mormons, I just want to take a second to talk about how delicate this is, because yes, BYU professors in the science department are pro-evolution, but religion professors at the same BYU are anti-evolution. And all of the students, most of the students who attend Brigham Young University were raised by parents and attended seminary and institute classes and Sunday school classes where evolution was taught not only to be wrong, but to be like one of Satan's teachings. Yeah. And then you add to that all the prophetic utterances of people like Bruce R. McConkie and Joseph Fielding Smith denouncing, evolution as one of the 7 deadly heresies, and I'm not making that up. Then you've got this environment where the church has officially chose to not take an official stance because they can't throw past prophets, seers, and revelators under the bus. Yeah. So they're silent on the matter. All the students are coming armed for bear to kill all the BYU science professors that are pro-evolution. And it makes it a real, and the professors don't want to lose their jobs. They don't want to lose tenure, and they don't want to denounce past prophets, seers, and revelators. So they have to, and even when I was there, students were turning in biology professors and complaining to school administration that their professors were teaching evolution. And I know this happens in 2022. So it's just this weird, bizarre kabuki dance that our culture is doing.
Yeah. That's wild. You can get a diploma from Brigham Young University and you could have all of your classes. You're taking religion classes that teach anti-evolution in the same day that you're getting a biology degree where you're learning evolution. And nobody has a problem. I have a problem.
It's weird.
I like the term kabuki dance. What's a kabuki dance?
Maybe I used a bad term. It's just
it could be a fashion. I don't know really what the term is, but you've got this.
I'm guessing it doesn't exist.
I think what's going on is sort of like an outsourced gaslighting. Okay, people, when you see a problem, you talk to a leader. They say go and talk to the experts. The experts give a solution that doesn't align with what the leaders believe. So, if you go and talk to the church leader, I've got a problem because, evolution, they'll say, go and talk to the scientists at BYU, and then they'll tell you something completely different to what the church believes. So it's quite dishonest because the problems are real. they're just not being addressed. So the leaders are outsourcing their problem solving to sort of semi-independent people who are paid salaries by the church. So I don't know. It's hard to sort of, I don't know what the name for that sort of thing is, but it's plausible deniability is one way of referring to it, because if they go and talk to an academic at BYU, they don't like what they hear, and they come back to the church leader and they say, well, the academic said this. Well, yeah, it's not me, it's the academic.
But also the LDS Church, claims 16 million members. They've got members of the U.S. Senate, members of the House of Representatives. They've got federal justices, CEOs of Fortune 500 companies, not to mention all the professionals out there. It's a real disservice to millions of Mormons to continue to have such an anti-science curriculum that leaves so many people like me and Carah and Gerardo and others, like, to be a faithful, obedient Mormon means to distrust and downgrade the validity of science and the scientific method. To feel like you're a faithful Mormon, you have to distrust and devalue science, which is going to have all sorts of implications, whether it's believing in germ theory, whether it's believing in modern medicine, whether it's believing in climate change, not to get political, but like there's real world implications for teaching millions of people with money and power that science isn't necessarily to be trusted, or even more explicitly, that science is to be distrusted. Am I overstating that?
Well, and I mean, I don't want to get into the debate about vaccines, right? But just to mention, like, no wonder why the church has had a hard time with their members to accept the validity or the safeness of vaccines, even though the first presidency has come out with statements and promoting it and saying people should get vaccinated.
I was trying to avoid that topic. That's why I said germ theory generically. But it's fine.
Personal revelation.
I'll make an observation. I'll try to tread carefully. At the early stages of the pandemic, I joined an online forum to discuss the science surrounding COVID. And it was created by an good ex-Mormon friend of mine, but there were many Mormons in the group. And I had to leave after a couple of weeks because I repeatedly just felt this, the default position was to distrust science and to question absolutely everything and the motives. So there was a questioning of the motives, or distrust of the motives of the scientists. I remember putting up, we were discussing, I put forward a paper that was done by scientists. I think they were in France, and they were looking at in the very early stages, because we'd gone into lockdowns to protect everyone, and they were looking at the levels, when they brought in the tests to determine whether people had been infected. So the earliest antibody tests, and they found that there were very low levels, still only 2 or 3% of the French population, something like that, had been infected. And so the scientists just made the observation that it would, there is not enough immunity in the population that if you ended lockdown straight away, that you had enough immunity in that to protect the population. That's a scientific observation. But there were those in the group who felt, they're pushing their policy. They're pushing government policy. They weren't. They were just stating a fact that if only 2 or 3% of your population has been infected with COVID, and you've got 97% have not been infected, if you stop lockdowns, then the virus is going to go rampant, and you have thousands and thousands of people dying. So I just had to leave the group because it was not just one or two. It was just I felt the default position was to distrust science, and I think it's probably connected with science uncovering things that are a little bit uncomfortable from
Yeah,
No,
that was a point to mention it, right? That was my point to mention it. Just that Mormons used to distrust science. Like, I mean, everybody can have their own opinions about vaccines, but we're talking about Mormonism and their relationship with science, and just the fact that the Salt Lake Tribune has published articles by Mormon scholars talking about it. Just show like it's a fact that Mormons have had a hard time trusting science.
And it's not surprising when you see all of these quotes from apostles and even prophets that are just so critical of it.
As somebody raised in a very anti-science family, let me just say that it really comes down to Mormonism and its ideas
in the shadow of BYU, by the way.
In Provo. The doctrines around like personal revelation are really important to a lot of Mormons. And so if you start with the presupposition that the church is true and you can go on whatever feelings that come into your heart is truth now, that's directly, you're interpreting that as directly from God. That's a revelation that you've gotten. That trumps all science for the people I know. So,
and I'll just add, I'm going to be doing an episode in the next few days on the decline of the Mormon Church ? Inside information. So I've got an inside source, someone who works at a high level in the church. And he told me that in his stake, they're losing far more Mormons to sort of who are angry about the church accepting vaccines, promoting and encouraging vaccines. They're losing far more members on the right, conservative, anti-science side than they are on the left, LGBT affirming, faith crisis over church history kind of issues. So this is actually causing a real fracturing in the church. It's sort of the chickens coming home to roost when you bring up a big percentage of your population being anti-science, and then there's a pandemic, and then there's a vaccination that you want to encourage literally to keep your members alive. Then the chickens kind of come home to roost when they leave your church because you're encouraging the support of science.
Yeah.
It's not to get political. I'm just saying, like, we're talking about the delicate dance the church is now having to make because of its history of being anti-science.
These things interlock. Trust me. I went, like I was saying, at the Book of Mormon Evidence Conference. You have people not just talking about the
also
Young
held
Earth.
In Provo, right?
No, that was in Sandy.
Oh, okay, Sandy.
Because you have booths there and they're talking about the Book of Mormon evidence that also has a lot to do with this young earth creationism stuff. We're talking about the earth having a core that's of ice and water. And then they're also selling essential oils, and all of those things just go right together and interlock perfectly for people who are not super into science. And by the way, you mentioned Dean Sessions. He says in the speech that I watched that BYU is too progressive now, and a lot of people are going further and further into their own little like conclaves and their own little pods of Mormonism. That's what I saw with Rod Meldrum and those type of people. They're more and more insular now, distrustful of even BYU, distrustful of the prophets of the church pushing vaccines, and they get more and more into their own little ideas in this own little bubble. That's what I observed, and it's a wild, wild phenomenon. We'll get into it more and more, Simon, through all of these.
We see a little bit of the here in Australia, but not nearly as. See, the COVID is not really. I mean, we've got the fringe elements, but both of our major parties have been fully supportive of the vaccines and basically following the science. So there's just this much greater acceptance of science in an evil secular country like Australia. But,
let's get back to your slides, Simon.
Let's go back to the slides, because I don't have references for this, but trust me, I've just drawn it from a bunch of Pew Research sites and other people who've done surveys of the LDS Church and whatever. So this I think illustrates, and this in the next slide will illustrate the challenge that the church has in that the acceptance of human evolution is just so widespread and growing. The next slide will show this really clearly, but so for all intents and purposes, if somebody accepts evolution from lower life, they reject young earth creationism. Okay, so if there's very, very high acceptance of evolution, they reject the Young Earth Creationism we're seeing in this Institute lesson. So amongst scientists, biologists and geologists, it's something like 99.9% who are trained and understand the science, who accept evolution from lower forms of life, human evolution as well. So it's just very widely accepted. Amongst scientists generally, it's a bit lower, about 95%. Now, I put a box here for BYU life scientists, but I suspect anybody with a PhD at BYU would fully accept evolution, and probably even human evolution, given they're teaching it there. So I suspect that at BYU it's very high. Now, if you look at advanced sort of developed countries, Australia, the UK, Sweden, I've lumped them all together here. I've come up with an approximate numbers, but it's about 85% of their population accept human evolution over millions of years. The US is a real outlier. I've seen a graph where they rank about 50 countries, and I think the only country below America was Turkey. So you got, only about 50% of the US population. America's just very religious and quite an interesting outlier in the global population. So, but when you come to Utah, if you rank US states, Utah is the bottom of the US almost.
Wow.
It's down there with Alabama and Mississippi and other states, predominantly from the South, I guess. I've also added a bar there for ex-Mormons because you might have remember I did a poll about a couple of months ago. I polled a bunch of ex-Mormons here in Australia and in the US, and I was quite surprised. It's very high. It's probably even way higher than 95%. I think it's close to 98% of ex-Mormons who fully accept evolution over millions of years. So it's interesting, isn't it? They go from an environment where it's suffocatingly, basically young Earth creationist ideas are the norm and accepted. They leave the church and they just completely let go of it.
So Simon, I conclude at least two things from this slide. Well, one is that ex-Mormons are better than Australians, but then does that mean that ex-Mormon Australians are the best of all? Is that what you're saying?
No, I was actually quite surprised. We were no better than you guys. Australian ex-Mormons are pretty much the same. Actually, I'm trying
to give you a compliment there, Simon. I was just trying to throw you a compliment.
I've excluded people who, like 10% of the Australians that I surveyed, the ex-Mormons that I surveyed, didn't have an opinion. Okay, and it was lower in America. America's a bit more polarized, but I suspect it is they just don't care. The 10%. So I don't think we did have one person that said they were young Earth creationists, but they were American, so they had joined the Australian post-Mormon group, and it was very similar. Just a very high proportion. I was quite surprised. I thought it was going to be, quite a bit lower. But this is a graph that is fascinating for what it reveals about the trends that are occurring in the world. And I think my theory is that the internet is probably starting to influence these sorts of views on evolution. So the graph that I'm showing here are the result. It shows the results of a 35-year survey that was conducted on first-year university students who were about to study biology at the University of New South Wales. And each year, about 400 students are surveyed as they walk into their first lecture, and they're asked, what they believe. And the options, there are only 4 options on the survey. One of them, do you accept human evolution over millions of years without any intervention from God? So they fully accept evolution. Then one option was, do you believe God directed evolution over millions of years? Another option was they're uncertain. And the final option was, do you believe that the Earth was, that evolution, or do you believe basically creationism, that life was created on the Earth about 10,000 years ago? So it's interesting because when this survey started not long after I had commenced university. And back then, about 50% of kids believed that God directed evolution over many years. That's now dropped down to around about 20% over the 35-year period. But in the same time, the number that fully accept a evolution without a God involved has risen from 30% to, I estimate today, 70%. And you can see there's a line. They've got each year they've got a dot, and there's a line that plots where the sort of, where it's heading, and there's a clear uptick. So it's actually sort of accelerating in the last 20 years, the acceptance of evolution. And you can see a very clear downtick in the acceptance of creationism, which back in 1985 was around about 10% of the students fronting up at university believed creationism ideas. That's now down in 2022 to probably closer to 2 to 3%. And that looks like it's accelerating down. And I don't think there's any real surprise here, because if you go on the internet now, with the explosion of scientific information in the last 10, 20 years, 30 years, with the human genome and all of the exciting sciences being published, it's not just the science, it's the science communication. And the world has just got really, really good. Scientists and science communication specialists have become very, very good at explaining in very simple terms how things work and what evolution means and the basis of DNA and all this sort of stuff. So it's very easy to understand that kids these days who are very literate on the internet find their way in to see these videos. And many of these are just only 5 minutes. And I've on the final slide, I've actually got links, and I think Gerardo will put these up afterwards, to a couple of links that explain DNA science in 5 minutes. And they are absolutely brilliant. They explain them more beautifully than I have ever seen before. They're truthful, they're honest, and they're accurate, but they're just so beautifully explained with the graphics and worlds, very simple explanations from very competent communication specialists. So it's no surprise. So these are trends that the church cannot push back, can't ignore. I suspect that these trends are happening in the US. I suspect probably in Utah as well, because Mormon kids are going to see all of these videos explaining evolution and DNA and all that sort of stuff. So it's just interesting to see that change in those positions that are going to come the way of the church, because the younger generation is growing up very, very science literate. But I threw in this slide to contrast the church's position with the Catholic position on evolution. The Catholic Church actually has quite a deal of respect for science. In fact, since 1936, I think it's about 85 years, the Catholic Church has had a pontifical academy in the Holy See in Rome, where they have scientists that are employed. They even invite other scientists that are not Catholics to come and speak at the academy. The only thing they have to agree to is to not be rude to the Catholic Church. They can talk about any science. So the church is very open to science. And this is what Pope Francis said in 2014. When we read the account of creation in Genesis, we risk imagining that God was a magician, complete with an all-powerful magic wand. But that was not so. Evolution in nature does not conflict with the notion of creation because evolution presupposes the creation of beings who evolve. That's the Catholic Pope. Sorry, the Pope is a Catholic, obviously. I think that's a joke.
That's a great contrast, though, between,
2014, but it will be, if you go back to that slide, I just want to make one more point with regards to the Pope. That is not a sudden change of position for the Catholic Church in 2014. Okay, the Catholic Church has been cool with this stuff for decades. Okay, they are not taking a stand. They're not going to die on this hill. But it's interesting that they have, and if you go, you can go online and read about the Academy. So they make lots of very, it makes sensible. If you're the head of the biggest church one of the biggest churches on the planet, you need to be abreast of these things. You need to be abreast of science. They take lots of positions on science, moral positions, which might be questionable. But in terms of science, it's like they respect science and scientists. You see I think it's quite a clear difference with the church because the leaders of the LDS Church seem to believe that they're the experts on everything. And they're making claims in the scientific field, which are very problematic.
And you're saying there's...
But contrast that with Gerardo. You might want to read this one out. You put it in there. But Russell M. Nelson's views on evolution. This is a quote. He was interviewed by the Pew Research Center back in 2007.
He said, to think that man evolved from one species to another is to me incomprehensible. Man has always been man. Dogs have always been dogs. Monkeys have always been monkeys. It's just the way genetics works.
There's one kind of monkey, one kind of dog, one kind of human, one kind of Homo sapien.
Yeah.
That's basically what he's saying. He's saying, I don't know what a species is, and I don't know how genetics works. He's admitting the problem as he's talking.
Yeah. It's just, it's actually not the way genetics works. And if we go on to the next, we're going to finish off with just a couple of slides.
You added this. Sorry. Go ahead, John.
Yeah.
It is just outrageously bizarre that a medical doctor in the 21st century in a global world religion shows such a paltry and embarrassing level of intellectual sophistication. I am deeply embarrassed that this guy leads our church holding this point of view.
Yeah. You added this, Simon. I don't know if you want to talk about it just really quick. That's this sentence that says, the less a heart surgeon knows about evolution, the better.
Yeah, that's a quote from me, actually. It's just, he's not an expert on evolution. He's probably not, he's forgotten everything he was taught in evolution at university. It was probably a university where most of the places where he studied, they probably didn't believe evolution anyway.
But he's influencing millions of people, and that's the problem.
Influenced me right out of the church, as a matter of fact. Literally, that one and the Joseph Fielding Smith quotes are honestly like triggering. I could cry because it was me reading those quotes, recognizing that I could not be in a church where that was the prophet that was leading it. Because like John said, it was embarrassing. I don't want to be associated with it. I was on that track. Maybe God did evolution, but there you are. He's not even admitting the evolution. Pains me.
Well, I'm going to show you a couple of slides now about dog evolution, okay? Because just when you start searching online, there are just dozens and dozens of amazing research papers that have been published on dog evolution just in the last 5 years, 10 years. But dogs and wolves are 99.9% identical at the genome level. It's well known amongst scientists that dogs are domesticated wolves. Okay, so they're 99.9%. To give you some context, the human next to you, sitting next to you, is probably about 90. Their genome is about 99.9% the same, similar to yours. So the amount of variation that we have between dogs and wolves is similar, very similar, not much different to the variation we have in the human population. All they are is just highly selected breeds. I mean, they're actually a very, very beautiful illustration of evolution in action. Okay, you have all of this random variation in the wolf genome and in the ancestral, the earliest dogs that were domesticated, which obviously would have looked very much like wolves, but they carried a huge amount of variation, and then humans have selected them. So human is the natural driving force that has selected them when they're breeding them, and that's given rise to the massive variation that we have in dogs today. But this is a graph that I'm showing a graph here, which is basically what they call a phylogenetic tree. So they've grouped dogs into a tree based purely on the DNA similarity. And in this paper, they'd gone back and they'd sequenced the genomes of some very ancient dogs that they'd found in Germany. And they can tell from the fossils very clearly that they're a dog and they're not a wolf. And they found from that information that dogs probably began separating from wolves about 40,000 years ago. And so by about 20,000 years ago, they then started to diverge into the breeds of dog that we have that are common in, say, China, India, and Europe.
So before Adam.
Yes. 40,000 before Adam. Yeah. The other interesting thing is that, so that's from, you might even want to put that link to the Nature paper. That was in 2017.
In the show notes?
Yeah. But the next slide, and there's another link you can put in as well for the show notes, because this is a pretty interesting one. But if you search for just dog evolution images, you'll probably find this image. But if you could expand that one, Gerardo. And what you can, on the left-hand side of this diagram is a spectacular phylogenetic tree of dog evolution. So what the scientists have done is they've sequenced the mitochondrial genome. Most people have probably heard about the mitochondrial DNA work that was done on humans in Native Americans. I've talked a fair bit about in the past. But they've sequenced the mitochondrial DNA of over 650 dog breeds, as well as wolves. And they've built this beautiful phylogenetic tree that groups dogs, and they've grouped all of the major dog breeds into this beautiful basically a circular phylogenetic tree where it radiates from the center, which was where the original wolf ancestor of dogs came from. And you can just see all of the major groups of dogs all bunch very neatly together in this phylogenetic tree. But what I've highlighted on the right-hand side of the slide is a magnified area from that slide showing the evolution of wolves and some of the ancient breeds that I think are quite interesting. One of them being the dingo. Dingoes are a wild dog that's found in Australia. It's believed that it was brought here by humans between something like 3,000 and 5,000 years ago. And the dingo, you can see, because of these phylogenetic trees, they group dogs that are very closely, if they're close together in the tree, that means they're closely related. And so you can see here that the dingo is most closely related to dogs that come from Asia. So there's a bunch of Asian breeds of dogs from, say, China and Japan that are grouped fairly close to the dingo. And that makes perfect sense because the dingo was brought in probably from somewhere like Papua New Guinea or from Indonesia in a migration. But it also has in there a couple of North American breeds of dogs. I think one of them I think is the Alaskan Malamute, and you've got a Husky. There are very few North American breeds of dogs that are surviving, but there are two dogs there from the Arctic which have survived, and they're also included in this tree, and they are related to Asian dogs as well. So you can see how the Australian dingo and the breeds in North America are related, descended from Asian breeds. Now that's interesting because wolves are native to both North America and to Europe. So why would it be that the North American dog breeds that the Eskimos had and the Alaskans had, why would they not have been domesticated? It doesn't appear that they were domesticated from wolves in North America. It wasn't an independent domestication. This means that the dogs, when the humans first came to the Americas, they brought with them dogs. Otherwise, we would see a very different, very, very different branch for the breeds that are unique to the Americas.
Interesting. So cool, Simon.
Yeah, so I think it's just
not
really,
always been dogs.
No,
Dogs have not always been dogs.
That must have been really hard for Noah to keep track of all those on the ark too. So many kinds.
But you look at the staggering diversity of dogs.
Yeah.
That appears in how long? I would say the major breeds, your terriers and your hounds and whatever, spaniels, whippets and whatever, the major clusters probably were set in place a few thousand years ago because people were, breeding dogs, to accompany them when they're hunting, when they protect their families, or to sniff out things underground, like ferrets or whatever. So there were many early domestication sort of laid the groundwork for many of the modern breeds, but then it's just gone absolutely crazy in the last 300 or 400 years with, what is now really quite dangerous breeding because they're leading to the problem of inbreeding, where many of these breeds just have you've just sort of narrowed down their genetic base so much that you increase the frequency of these problematic genes in their genome, so you end up with defects. So yeah, it's beautiful to see this, but there is a bit of a dark side to what's going on with dog evolution at the moment. Which is,
there's a
I
dark
think,
side.
why we've got a lot of crossbreeds, like these poodle crosses with many, many different breeds of dogs these days. It's good from one perspective because it's sort of minimizing or reducing that sort of problem. But
Yesterday, Margi and I were walking, and I saw a cross between a poodle and a Bernese Mountain Dog. And if you've ever seen how big Bernese Mountain Dogs are, I am wondering how that worked.
Yeah, they're pretty famous.
The owner actually made the point that the mom is the Bernese Mountain Dog. She felt like that was important to tell me.
Yeah. Usually the smaller dog will be the
And
dog
short
with the
canes.
dad.
Yeah.
Sometimes they will my husband's really into dogs, really, really into dogs. So sometimes they would do like artificial insemination if the dad, because usually you want the dad to be the small dog. So you would do artificial insemination to the big dog, which would be the mom. Yeah. Kind of interesting.
Well, that's you can see one of the aspects of evolution there. You're getting a breeding barrier, which is occurring. Now, if you just let things run their course for another, few thousand years, I mean, there already are breeds of dog that you can't interbreed with them because you can't interbreed a Chihuahua with a massively large Saint Bernard. I suspect would have to be done in a certain way around. as you mentioned, John. But the same thing occurs in trees. In eucalypts, there's an example of, there's one eucalypt called Eucalyptus globulus, which has a massive flower that's probably 2 or 3, a couple of centimeters across. And when you can cross it with other eucalypts that have a very small flower, but you can't pollinate the male from the small flower. You can't take the small male flower pollen and pollinate the big Eucalyptus globulus flower, because the pollen hasn't got the energy to get down and fertilize the seeds in the flower.
That is the running debate. Does size matter? That's right.
It does matter in trees, some trees. But that's how very often speciation occurs. You get these barriers to reproduction that crop up, and then a new species is out there. But there's often a period, and this will come up when we talk about human evolution, long periods where there's still a bit of cross mixing between that's gone on in our past. We're gonna hear a bit about that. But it's also a thing in dog evolution. So there was a long period of time when wolves were still mating with dogs, and I think they can even mate today with dogs. We get mixing between dingoes and Australian domesticated dogs as well. So they can still interbreed. So that's been a little bit of a complicating factor in tracking the evolution of dogs, because they will breed with wolves.
So Simon, to summarize what point we're making with this amazing dog chart and analysis, tell us what we should conclude. Sorry, let me find the right view. Tell us what we should conclude.
Basically it's just that it's happened over tens of thousands of years, and all aspects of evolution have been involved. It's considerable variation in the wolf population, probably new variation coming in from wolves. That's the raw material for evolution, and then you've got selection. So, and we're humans. We're part of the natural world. It's natural selection that's occurring, just as done by humans. I mean, some people will call it artificial selection, but it's a selecting driving force, and you can see the impact of it in the massive diversity in dogs today. You could be excused for believing that some are different species, but given enough time, they will turn into different species.
And at the end, well, I think dogs is a really good example of, just to reiterate what you were saying, Simon. Dogs are a good example of evolution in a short period of time, that we can see it in a very short period of time, how all these breeds have developed, and how so it's a very palpable example of evolution. And I also think it's interesting that also
I picked it as an example because the prophet mentioned dog evolution, so the bait was hung out there and I took the bait. But imagine a situation, you can, like throughout history, you can imagine the way evolution works is you've got all this variation. Just imagine if something happened and a particular variety of dog was the one that everyone wanted, and all the other ones, they just dropped them. That's sort of how evolution works. There'll be a particular force in evolution, a niche will open up, or a new food source will come along that one variety of dog, say, can really latch onto. That population then explodes, becomes massive. It then lives for thousands and thousands of years. It starts accumulating genetic variation. Then if another force comes along, another driving force of natural selection comes along, then you can get more and more speciation occurring. If people are interested in looking at many other examples of this, there are beautiful, if you go to the Smithsonian, they've got beautiful illustrations of whale evolution. Whales are really fascinating because they Land animals evolved out of the sea. The whales went back from land animals. So there's a beautiful, and they've got many of the skeletons of many of the ancestors of whales now really clearly identified. So it's a fascinating story, whale evolution. A particularly interesting thing I read just recently is from the rocks that the skeletons are buried in, they can determine the oxygen concentration as they were formed. Okay, so as the animal dies and is buried and the fossils are formed, the oxygen in the soil can tell you whether that organism was in a land animal, or if it was in fresh water, or if it was in salt water. And they've been able to match up when the whale ancestors were living in fresh water from the rocks that were formed nearby.
Fascinating.
So whales is a really good one. Another one is horse evolution. It's fascinating. Yeah. Carah's pointing at something.
No, just
Okay.
like A-okay with me.
Cool. You're really animated. That's cool.
Because I freaking love evolution. I'm just like, can't sit still. It's true.
Well, evolution is going to be a constant theme throughout many of the scientific episodes, and I'll talk a little bit more about it at the molecular level, but because molecular genetics that's the nuts and bolts of how evolution occurs. But look, to wrap up for today, I thought I've just sort of to summarize. I think it's quite clear that Mormon doctrine is fairly black and white, and it's due to the additional LDS scripture that we have. Adam is the father of the human race. Adam lived about 6,000 years ago, and the Garden of Eden is a real place. So they're almost not negotiable. I haven't seen much sign of any leaders of the church moving away from those. And it's quite clear from, even James E. Talmage, who was fairly pro-science, he does not believe that humans evolved from a lower form of life. And that's a fairly widespread view in the church. However, many Christian churches don't have this problem. They don't have a problem believing that Adam and Eve, the story of the Garden of Eden, Adam and Eve, is fiction. Meanwhile, we've got Mormon scientists at BYU are teaching human evolution, and I don't know how long that'll go on. This sort of almost bipolar handling of human evolution, which it's okay.
No, go ahead, Simon.
I was just going to shift on to the next slide, which sort of gives a brief.
What I would, if we can go back, Gerardo, what I would add to that summary slide is that Mormon doctrine teaches that prophets, seers, and revelators speak directly to God. They have been miseducating the members for well over 150 years now, that this has been damaging to the intellectual development of the LDS church membership, but also now the church is trying to have it both ways, where they don't denounce the past utterances of prophets, seers, and revelators, but they also don't come out in support of evolution. And so they have this kind of oatmeal middle ground where they decline to take a position, and that leads to more confusion, and it also leads to a continued, fracture and schism within the church, as the church has a large branch of science deniers and science haters, and then a bunch of other people that want to leave the church because the church is too backwoods, too primitive, too unsophisticated, and it just ultimately begs the question: what is the value of Mormon scripture if it can get things so fundamentally wrong? What is the value of prophets, seers, and revelators if they not only don't see this ahead of time, but even half a century after, or a century after this stuff is revealed, they still won't embrace it? And then what does it mean now to all the, if the church gets it wrong on evolution and on the age of the earth and on Adam and Eve, which all Mormon doctrine and theology and scripture are based on, including the temple ceremony, what else did the church get wrong? And I think that's part of what this series is going to help us explore are any of the other things the church has gotten wrong over the years. Am I being too harsh? Is that too harsh?
There was a general authority went and spoke at his name is Pearson. It's one of the general authorities, was under the direction of the leaders of the church, spoke at one of the apologetic meetings, fair, in about 2017 or 2018, I think. And in defense of the Book of Mormon, he encouraged independent voices. Okay, that's a green light for Crazy Town. He's encouraging people to get online and produce videos to defend the Book of Mormon. Well, they're doing it for not just the Book of Mormon, but they're doing it for Young Earth Creationism. I mean, Rodney Meldrum is a product of encouraging independent. We're not taking a position and encouraging these independent voices.
Yeah. I'm not sure we told you, Simon, but we plan on having Rodney Meldrum on Mormon Stories in the next few weeks.
Oh, right.
We may seek your support in preparing for that interview.
You finally caved in.
Okay. No, we're not caving in.
Yeah.
My mom has never watched this podcast until she's like, when's he coming on? She can't wait to watch Rod tell us what's what. So my mom will be tuning in.
Simon, we're going to be careful. We're not going to let him spout pseudoscience. We are going to have him tell his story, and then we're going to put him on the record of what his positions are, but we're not going to let him try and argue them in any persuasive way. But we do want to get him on the record of what his positions are.
Yeah.
Publicly.
Yeah, well, that's probably going to be an episode I can respond to.
and we're not going to
bait him or anything.
Him.
No.
We're not going to beat him up, and we're not trying to set a trap.
No.
But he influences at least tens of thousands of people.
Mm-hmm.
And
I have a personal stake in it, just because my parents are always sending me his books and things. So, I think, like John said, that he influences a lot of people. So getting him on record of just the things that he believes without having too many convincing arguments. I mean, I don't think they are convincing, but doing it in a respectful way on this platform.
And Gerardo, you pay attention to Meldrum a lot too, right?
A little, not a lot, but
yeah. And Simon, just so you know, Rodney has seen the episode that you did with Gerardo of you debunking the Heartland model. So,
I think he responded on. I think I actually listened to his response. He responded on another podcast. Series. Yeah.
Mormon Book Reviews.
Mormon Book Reviews. Yeah.
Shout out.
But he didn't really give solid responses to the science.
No.
Yeah. I mean, it's just a tricky thing. Yeah.
Well, let's talk about what we've got next, and then I want to close by replugging our series and asking people to support. So, what's next to bat, Simon?
Well, I think the next thing is when we've talked a little bit about human evolution, but as I mentioned at the beginning, I opened a can of worms with creation. There's a whole bunch of science topics that come up out of that can. And I think the first one that's worth addressing is really human evolution in detail. So we'll go over a little bit of what we've talked about here, but probably talk a bit more about some of the comments church leaders have made about evolution. But then go out and I'd like to go through some of this, just the science related to human evolution from a range of areas. I don't want to just sort of give lots and lots of evidence from, a range of fields. I just want to tell little stories about particular pieces of science that I think are really extremely compelling. One of them is the presence of Neanderthal and Denisovan DNA in our genomes. These Denisovans died out 60,000 years ago, and Neanderthals died out about 30,000 years ago. Okay, so how is it that we've
Pre-Adamites.
got? That sounds very pre-Adamite to be carrying that DNA, but there are many other pieces of molecular evidence that are independent that really clearly illustrate that we are humans have evolved from common ancestor with primates and all living things.
Right.
So, and I've some apologists are starting to comment about these sorts of things, and I'll have some interesting quotes from Hugo Perego, who's famous for, he was pretty much the principal author of the DNA versus the Book of Mormon essay, but he has spoken about human evolution. He believes that humans evolved 200,000 years ago. He doesn't have any problem with pre-Adamites. So, yeah. But,
Do you mind if we ask you another follow-up question as we wrap up?
Sure.
So in your opinion, how do like evolutionary scientists that are Mormon embrace evolution and also stick with the Mormon beliefs at the same time? What's your opinion on that?
I think there are a few things that they just don't form too hard an opinion on. I suspect they believe that evolution is a process that God used over millions of years to guide the formation of our species. I don't know how they grapple with Adam and Eve. Hugo Perego does try to grapple with Adam and Eve a bit, but his escape clause is always, the church doesn't have a position on this. But as we can see, the church has made many positional statements over the years. But
I think you're going to cover if it's possible that all the human species came out of a couple, right? Like Adam and Eve.
Yeah, we'll talk about that. There's just not enough there's so much genetic variation in the human population. You can't squeeze it through two people 7,000 years ago.
Right.
And
that's the Mormon position. Work. It's what we learn in the temple. It's what we learn from scriptures, as you pointed out.
That's the LDS position.
Cool.
And humans there's just abundant evidence that China has been heavily populated by humans for 10,000, 20,000 years. Humans have been in Asia for 40 to 50,000 years. Aboriginal Australians have been in Australia for 50 to 60,000 years. So if you start insisting that if all humans descend from Adam 6,000 or 7,000 years ago, then there's going to be Mormons who attempted to narrow down that human population who are genuine Adamites and the other ones that are not descended from Adam. And then you're getting into very dangerous territory. And there are some early statements in the church, quotes that I might dig out from very early on in the history of the church, where they claimed that it was the white race were descended from Adam. Okay.
Yeah, that's a problem.
So this is a minefield for the church.
Yeah.
A real minefield. So, but I won't tread too carefully. We'll set a few of them off.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, before we close, I have to make one more pitch really quickly. For those of you who joined us late that didn't hear the introduction, or for those who haven't kind of thrown their support yet, I just want to make sure everybody hears what we announced at the beginning, that we're super excited that we're launching it's kind of a pilot project with Dr. Simon Southerton. Our plan is to have him come once a month on Mormon Stories Podcast, and over 12 to 15 to 20 month period, hopefully do an episode a month where he takes on various aspects of Mormon doctrine and analyzes how they match up to science. We will be paying Dr. Southerton or Simon for his work. So we're asking everyone to please go to mormonstories.org/podcast/Simon, click on the donation button, become a monthly donor. And we promise that 100% of your donations to this project will go to support Simon. And when you click that donate button, you'll get a little message that gives you a link to a PDF, which is Simon's new book. I say in the past year or two. It's a book called The Sacred Curse: How Native American DNA Exposes Mormonism's Lamanite Myth. It's a follow-up to Losing a Lost Tribe. That was Simon's first book on this topic. But it's a really important book. And if you want the latest in DNA and Native Americans in the Book of Mormon, support Simon, support the education, the informed consent of Mormons and non-Mormons everywhere, and support Simon's work on Mormon stories.
Please.
Cool. Thanks, John. I was just going to say that, when I talk about Sacred Curse was published a couple of years ago. Even in that couple of years, there's just been really fascinating discoveries. And I'll try to, when I do a podcast, have the absolute latest research that's relevant to the particular topic. Like, for example, the fact that Polynesians reached the Americas, a couple of hundred years before Columbus reached the Americas. That was only discovered in the last 18 months.
Wow.
So really fascinating stuff. And that's not even in my book, I think.
John, I think there's a couple people saying that they donated, but they haven't gotten the link to the book. Is it something that's going to happen later?
The way I set the donation button up is they should get a reply email that gives them the link. And if it's not working, if you donated and you didn't get a reply email with the link, just email me at mormonstories@gmail.com. I will send you the link directly. But what should happen is you should get a reply email that includes the link. But we just set the system up. We won't rip you guys off, but we'll take care of you, and we'll test it and make sure it works after this. I set that up like 30 minutes before we came to air. So, yeah.
Right.
And Gerardo, can I just thank you? I know you put a ton of work into this, getting Simon's audio set up, his camera, helping Simon with the research and with the slides, just making all this happen. Gerardo, you are a rock star. You are a super valued and treasured member of this team. We love you and appreciate you so much. Thank you for making this happen, Gerardo.
Hey,
and same here. Gerardo's been fantastic. Found some really neat little links. These little videos, he put me onto an absolute cracker of video the other day, and it's really been very helpful. He's been very helpful.
Thank you,
Simon.
Thank you,
you're a legend, Simon. You're a pioneer. You're a legend, and we honor you. We're not worthy. We should do a Wayne's World. We're not worthy. We're not worthy. Thank you, Simon, for coming on.
There is a good influence on you.
Now, Wayne's World's before Carah's time, right?
I grew up on Wayne's World, actually.
Did you?
Oh, okay.
All right.
Is that where it came
Creationist,
from?
I think you better leave. There you go.
And Carah, thanks for helping us not have this be a sausage fest. It's great to have you on.
I made it into one with all of my questionings about size, apparently, in the comment section. Always comes back to that.
Always bringing down the level of discourse with humor. We're raising it.
To a level that people understand, which is very important.
Yeah.
Okay, well, Simon, again, thank you. Gerardo, Carah, thanks everyone. And thanks to all our viewers and listeners that made amazing comments on the live stream. We really appreciate that. Thanks to everyone who donated. We did have several people donate. You can still do it if you're on YouTube right now. You can click on the little Simon Southerton campaign. We're up to $354.
Oh, gosh.
We hope to pay Simon at least $1,000 per episode. We've also got donations coming in to the link, the donor box link. Those are monthly donations. If we can, we love monthly donations because then we can know that we're going to be able to meet the goal. So thank you. YouTube's great, donations there, but also for those of you who are willing to donate in the donor box link, that'll allow us to predictably pay Simon or figure out what we can do to fundraise to throw Simon a little cheddar cheese for his amazing work.
Throw him a little shrimp on the Barbie, you could say. On the Barbies.
So the backstory to that, shrimp is not a word that we use in Australia.
What do you use for shrimp? What's the word?
Prawn.
That
whole thing was Americanized.
Prawn.
Prawn. Yeah. It sounds.
All right.
Yeah, it sounds terrible.
Thanks. Thanks
Throw,
again, Simon.
throw whatever
Maybe when
you want on the
American says
Barbie.
it.
All right.
All
Well,
right.
thanks, Simon. Thanks, everyone. Thanks to all you support Mormon Stories, and
Yeah.
please
Thank
be
you,
good to
John.
each other. Please share this episode with everyone that you think could benefit from it. Please send it to Carah's mom and dad, Carah's siblings. Please send it to every church member in Utah County and in Cache Valley and in Southern Utah and in Idaho and Arizona.
Let them reckon with what their church teaches versus what the university teaches.
Just let them get educated about science.
Yeah.
Right? And
Mm.
if you're going to have to choose between Mormon doctrine and science, and if there's a conflict, go with science. And I promise you, eventually the church will follow along. True?
I don't know. I feel like they're going towards, well, we'll have to talk about in the next episode. Are they going towards small tent Mormonism? Are they doubling down?
We'll see. We'll see. I also have a great episode coming up on is the Mormon Church in decline? Tips from an insider. That's going to be coming out in the next few days. I think it's going to be kind of a blockbuster, at least a relative blockbuster. So stay tuned for that. We've got Rodney Meldrum coming up. Lots of cool episodes in the coming weeks, months, and years on Mormon Stories Podcast. And Carah, I'm sure you'll be bringing us some cool stuff like you did the Jordan McKay episode.
Yeah. Did you guys like Jordan McKay's episode this week? We had some great viewership.
We literally
a lot of people tuned in.
We had the highest YouTube viewership ever this week, thanks to Jordan McKay and Carah for lining that up.
Yeah. If you guys
So-
haven't seen them yet, it's a 3-part episode. So go check them out. They're really popular right now.
Yeah.
So yeah, we've got a lot of exciting stuff coming from Mormon Stories. We already mentioned Margi's Thrive project, this Simon Southerton project. We've got John Larsen on regularly, and then John and I have a few other projects we're going to be announcing in the coming weeks too. So
Yeah, and check out if you happen to be interested, Thrive St. George is next weekend. Obviously in St. George, Natasha, David Bakavoy, Jesse Funk. I'm going to be there. Lots of cool people are going to be there. Go to thrivebeyondreligion.com to register. And then there's going to be a Thrive Houston, a Thrive Southern California, and a Thrive Florida on April 2nd.
nice.
And along with Thrive Time for Women in Salt Lake City over General Conference weekend. So please go to Thrive Beyond Religion to register for those amazing events where we do our best to create communities of support focused on healing and growth for progressive and post-Mormons. So thanks, everyone. Stay tuned. Thanks, Carah. You
Sean.
rock. Thanks, Simon, Gerardo, and everyone else. And
Love you guys.
be good to each other. And we'll see you guys all again soon on another episode of Mormon Stories Podcast. Choose science. Thanks, everybody.